and our topic is re-envisioning our content course syllabus. So we had a parallel session to this last week on our language development syllabus. So our learning objectives for this session is that we're able to describe, even to ourselves and also to the students, how our content courses still do facilitate language development, how we can create a progression of level-appropriate language functions in our course, in our content courses, and that we can use AI tools, begin familiarizing ourselves with some AI tools that can help support the language development, can help us help our learners in supporting language development in our content courses. So first off, what do I mean by content courses? Well, in the language schools, we have a lot of graduate courses. Some of our graduate courses are skills-based courses, but a lot of them have a theme of some kind. You see Spanish linguistics, Russian literature on the screen, dreams and fiction, classical Chinese poetry. So these are sort of graduate courses. Most of our graduate courses are a content course. But in our immersion tracks as well, we have content courses. Intro to Contemporary Italy is offered at a couple levels. Literature is offered in the German school at every level in some way. Portuguese has a thematic course historically. Sport in the Hispanic world. Health and societies in Africa. And Spanish and French have an interesting model where levels 3 and 4, they sign up together, one class a day, for a mixed course on a topic, and you have level 3 and level 4 students in the same course. But we also have some content courses which are really focused on a particular theme or a skill, like creative writing, informal written Spanish, writing academic papers, these kinds of things. So in some schools, it's a course. In some, it's an hour of a 4-hour-long course. Like in Japanese, we got 4 hours, but there's like dedicated hour, dedicated space, which is more toward content. And in other schools, it's more fully integrated. This is true like in our Chinese school, for example, that the content topics are really interwoven deeply, not separated at all from the language development. So there's a couple different models for how this will look. But one thing that I think it's important when we think about our language development courses, of course, and also our content courses, that these are aligned to a proficiency level. And we do this for a few reasons. Learners want to know what level they're starting at and what level they want to end the summer at. Other institutions want to know, if we have our learners go to you, what level of proficiency, what level of capability in this language can they expect to have? This is a way of ensuring that our levels are kind of dispersed across the proficiency scale, that we have a way of getting anyone at any place in the proficiency scale going forward, whether we're using the ACTFL scale. European languages might be more familiar with CEFR. The US government uses the ILR scale, but I have them all blocked out here. So if I'm teaching the Italian 2 content course, Intro to Contemporary Italy, the learners are starting at intermediate low and ACTFL and kind of ending by the end of the summer at intermediate high. If I'm teaching a Spanish graduate class, over the course of the 4 years, we hope to get them from a high B2 up into the C1.2, maybe even some of them at a C2 level at the end. So they're moving this progression, and over the summer, they tend to usually go up 1 from where they started at. For like the French 3 or 4 or Spanish 3 or 4 sections, you can see it's a bit of a challenge. French 3, intermediate high to advanced mid, French 4, advanced low up into advanced high. So there's some tasks that will work well for both, but I have 2 groups of learners in my same content class that I have to be thinking about. Do I differentiate what kinds of functions? We may all be reading the same texts. We may all be watching the same videos, but what am I asking the level 3 learners to do in language versus the level 4 learners to do in language? So what ties these content courses together is it's not just the language, which is important, but we really want to teach things about the cultures of the people who speak this language. We want to teach about the analytical tools. What are the ways of thinking about culture? What are the ways of engaging literature, film? What are the ways of processing myself and how I interact and how I exist in intercultural communication settings? It is an occasion to apply the skills. I think content courses are more than just you learn language in the morning in your language development class and you practice it in the content class. But there is opportunities to do interpretive tasks where we read, watch, listen, interpersonal tasks where we interact with each other, we have discussion, and then presentational tasks where I narrate, I tell a story, or I make an argument, and this is done at length, not like the kind of little turn by turn that we do in a conversation. Another thing about these classes is that often a theme within our greater content topic is kind of what drives the syllabus. So let me give an example of this. I am going to just do an example from Farsi. We don't teach Farsi, so I want it to be neutral. Everyone wants us to teach Farsi. So I was thinking if I was teaching Farsi 3, the culture class, what are topics that would be appropriate for Middlebury Language Schools learners? I actually put in GPT, like, give me 6 topics, and I thought they were a little too infantile. But I, again, described, no, these are who my learners are, and it came up with some really good topics. I actually came up with the first one, Memories of Persian Empires, Family Memory and Struggle, Poetry in the Inner Life, City Modernity, Social Change, Revolution, War and Remembering, and Migration, Diaspora, and Belonging. So I could pick really interesting poems, videos, artworks, and actually kind of move from theme to theme. And I would have the themes. My syllabus might have the works of art or the media works or the literature works set out. And to a learner, it would feel like the themes are driving me forward or the pieces of media are driving me forward. But what I'd like to challenge us or kind of ask us to consider today is thinking, what if it were the language functions that were the spine, the thing that held it all together, the thing that drove us forward? Just like my spine is wrapped inside my body, you don't have to know that the spine is there, although you do know it is there, and it's what's holding me up. It's not necessarily visible. You know, what the learners might actually see are these topics. But if I think about the progression that we want to make in Farsi level 3, in weeks 1 and 2, they're at the intermediate mid level, 3 and 4, intermediate high, 5 and 6, in advanced low. So I could actually kind of cover this functional progression with my themes. But when I'm actually going to design my syllabus, to design my instruction, I want to make sure that what I'm asking learners to do in weeks 1 and 2 are things that are appropriate to practice at the intermediate mid level. The topics, our texts, our artifacts that we're working with may relate to these themes. But when I'm deciding, but what am I going to ask the learners to do in their groups? What am I going to ask them to write about, to speak about? I want to have these intermediate mid functions in mind. And again, for units 3 and 4, moving up to intermediate high, 5 and 6, moving up to the advanced low. And one reason I think that this is a great way to think about it is that it's really language functions that mostly tie the language development classes that are in our levels together to the content courses. And for our languages that have a fully integrated package like Japanese or Chinese, this is a way to make sure that learners are doing the same functions at that level, whether they're doing grammar practice or vocabulary practice, or whether they're doing something more with culture knowledge or interculturality or art. So whereas language development courses, the grammar, the vocabulary, the pragmatics instruction, the pronunciation are more the heavy focus. In our content courses, it's often the culture knowledge, the interculturality, the analytical skill, analytics of literature and art that are that more heavy focus. But both of these are present in the other. But what really is shared among the two, and what learners want to know at the end of the summer, is I can, these can-do statements. And ACTFL has amazing tables of this. So at the intermediate mid-level, both in interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, for writing and for speaking, in the different kind of domains of life, they have lists of very specific I can statements or can do statements, that these can be used to bring all of the people within a language level together and be like, okay, you might be practicing these functions more in the context of teaching the grammar, the vocabulary, the pragmatics. I might be working with these functions more in the context of history, social studies, art, literature. But we're working that together, and the learners should be able to kind of feel that tie and feel themselves moving along in both kinds of classes, being pushed forward in this kind of progress throughout the summer. So I'm going to pass this over then to Leah to talk about. Do you want to share your own screen, or would you like me to just click ahead?
Sure, you can just keep clicking. That's great.
Okay.
Wonderful. I don't know about the rest of you, but I love this analogy that Thor's been building up and making the spine visible, not only to the learners, but to us as faculty. because it was exciting to work with both Erica and Chris on Saturday, and they were talking to me about the functions, and they said, oh yes, these are all the functions that are embedded, but it wasn't necessarily clearly articulated in the syllabus. And so those are the conversations that we're trying to have to reimagine the syllabi as we move forward. So I really like that analogy, Thor. So I'll keep rolling with that, and we'll be happy to hear your thoughts on that with the breakout rooms. Some of you have been able to join us for the previous sessions. So I'm just going to briefly mention the revised 2026 ACTFL can-do statements, NISASFL ACTFL can-do statements. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the top of the document now is focused on the intercultural can-do statements. So the pale blue at the top, you'll see novice, intermediate, advanced, those benchmarks going across the top. The first part is to think about giving the students and learners authentic resources where they can explore the products and practices of those languages that you're studying in order to interact with intercultural communicative competence. So you can see that obviously the modes are still there. The interpretive, the presentational, the interpersonal are down below, but we're entering through the intercultural can-do statements. So that is a paradigm shift. So as we're thinking about our content courses, obviously you're leading with that in this domain, but as well as in the content courses, we'd like to think about that with the language acquisition and language development courses that we're entering through that lens of intercultural as well. So if we advance to the next part, I just want to make sure that we're all grounded in the analogy that our friend Chantal Thompson from Brigham Young University came up with. And I will briefly just do this analogy just to make sure we're all on the same page. Basically, we're thinking about how do we make that functional syllabus, and how do we think of that as the spine that carries us through. It's thinking about how do we build function, accuracy, content, and text type. That criteria is embedded in the can-do statements. It is also embedded in the 2024 proficiency guidelines. So if you'll bear with me and think about Chantal's analogy, she said to think of each learner as a tree. We start out as a very thin sapling. There are very few rings in that trunk of the tree as you start as a novice, low, and mid, and you start growing the span of your trunk as you continue to add functions and add your ability to do more with the language. So if you look at where the green line goes into the trunk, it's thinking about functions, creating with language, asking and answering questions, negotiating survival situations, describing, narrating in present, past, and future time, supporting an opinion, hypothesizing. With each unit that we are able to build out throughout the 7 or 8 week course, we are going to be able to give them opportunities to expand the rings of that tree trunk. She then goes on to say accuracy. I'm going to skip that for a moment because I want to talk about the root system. So the next one is the C for content and context. Every time we do a new theme or topic, memories of Persian empires, family, memory, and struggle, poetry, and inner life, each one of those is a new root system. And that's what keeps that tree tethered to the ground and makes it strong as the winds blow through. So your trunk continues to grow, your root system continues to expand, and it's quite easy to think about the analogy of the branches growing out. You start with a text type that's a word, expand to phrase, expand to simple sentence, strings of sentences, connected sentences, organized paragraph, extended discourse. So we can think about growing those branches. Now, what she says to remember is that we're going to put accuracy in its place. We all know the importance of vocabulary. We all know the importance of grammar and pronunciation in our different languages. But she said that's what makes the tree look beautiful. That is one part of building proficiency, and it's one part of assessing proficiency, but it is not the full story, as you well are aware of at Middlebury, because you are doing an immersion program where you're building out these functions across the different modes. So thinking about what can an intermediate student do, intermediate level student do? What type of accuracy would we expect? What type of content and context can they communicate about? And what kind of text type can they use as they progress through that that program over the summer. So if we go to the next slide, we're saying that we will have grammar in your syllabus. We will have vocabulary that is evident in your syllabus, but it will be in service of the function. So as we start to think about that spine that's going to be the essence of that syllabus, we can start thinking about how do we build the grammar and vocabulary needed for a functional syllabus to go through the 7 or 8 weeks. So I didn't want to go too much further without stopping to think about the role of language functions right now in your course. So maybe we could just pause for a moment here and maybe just get a couple comments, or feel free to add something to the chat if you like. What role do functions play in our courses now with your current content course that you're coming back to teach again this summer, or you have taught in the past? And what is the role of the can-do statements in those courses? So if I could open it up, I'd love to just get just a couple minutes here to get a sense of the role of functions as they stand right now. And by way of giving you thinking time, I will just say that each of those yellow buckets are the big ideas about a language function being describing memories of Persian empires, describing family memories and struggles, describing history of my people. It's also asking and answering questions about memories of Persian empires. It's asking and answering questions about memory and struggle. So we start that as a novice and we continue to evolve it as an intermediate, evolve as an advanced. So there are no functions that we just ignore until we get to that advanced level. We start building out this idea of expressing hopes, dreams, and future plans from the novice level, and what it will look like in terms of the depth of that function or the accuracy used will change. So I see that we have a couple people who have added to the chat here. So Atya, I don't know if you want to jump in and build upon that, but I love this idea of really focusing on how service the function is very important, like serving that function, making that the where we're pointing towards, I agree, is very important. Did you want to build upon that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I totally agree with you. The function, this is the like a magic keys for the in my opinion, for the successful classroom that students needs. It's not when we like learners teach the grammar or the vocab. It's just for the function of the grammar, the function of the appropriate using appropriate vocab in appropriate context. So it's something with like the function, and this is one of the aspects that missed in many classes, especially with the grammar like sections or classes.
Right.
So thank you so much for that you raised this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chris just shared that she thinks that function is where the students feel that they're getting somewhere in the target language. And I couldn't agree with that anymore. As you reflect at the end of each week of these 7 or 8 weeks, if learners get an opportunity to stop on Fridays and think, wow, look at what I can do today that I couldn't do 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, and it gives them that sense of building upon those functions, which I think is really important, with better vocabulary and better grammar and structures as you go through. So I think you're right, Chris. I think many of us find that the students end up receiving too many assignments focused on grammar. And if we put grammar in its context, in other words, saying that it is in service of that function, we're saying that we need that grammar, but to what end? So I think these are good points. So I'm gonna continue here and be able to let you get a sense of what these new can-do statements look like. So feel free to add more comments to the chat, because I see Brahim is saying the thematic layout of the syllabus is made concrete with functions. Wonderful. Okay. So I'm just going to take the criteria of fact, and I'm going to lay that on top of the new actful, necessful, can-do statements. So because we had already done novice in the previous recording, I thought I'd just move to intermediate and advanced here. So you're going to see that this is one page. This is presentational only. So I've only chosen one level here, and I've only chosen one mode of communication. So if you look to the left, you're going to see that the function is clearly outlined. There are 3 questions on each page of the can-do statements, and the questions are the functions. So if you look at the first row for intermediate, it says, how can I present information to inform and explain? My verb, my function is inform and explain. So that's my first one. When I look at my second question, it says, how can I present information to give a preference, opinion, or persuasive argument? Okay, that's my second function for this mode. And my third function is down below where it says, how can I present information to narrate about my life experiences and events? Okay, so in blue at the top on the left, I've outlined those are your 3 functions for the presentational mode. If you look at the tiny descriptions by sublevel, I'm aware that they're very small. So for my my needy eyeballs, I have typed them off to the left. Accuracy for this level for intermediate mid will be priority vocabulary and structures for the content or context of that unit. The content and context, they tell us, is familiar and some research topics. Again, that is in the blue rectangle section that has been highlighted. It also calls out the text type. It says by creating sentences and strings of connected sentences. So when I think back to that analogy of the tree and growing the branches, I need to provide strings of sentences and I need to elicit strings of sentences from my learners in order to move them up to that novice high. So it very clearly tells me what do I need to be able to pull from them as they're writing or speaking in the presentational mode. So if we advance the next one,
intermediate high. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll jump to intermediate high here. You're going to see that it looks again the same. So you can see the same functions. All 3 functions are the same. And now if you advance, you're going to be able to see that we'll put the square, the rectangle over intermediate high. So I've moved up one sublevel. You'll see that the blue functions do not change. They have remained the same. Inform and explain, give preference, opinion, narrate about my life and events. That remains exactly the same. What changes is now the accuracy. You are going to see here, this is the first time that it says often across various timeframes. So that is intermediate high. So when Thor was sharing examples last week, he was saying that sometimes you'll see a German 1 syllabus that has grammar that says often across a variety of time frames. Well, that doesn't work for a German 1 because you can see that that does not connect with what a German 1 proficiency target is, especially earlier on in the class. So that across timeframes, that's the first time that we see that, and that's an intermediate high. When you see that we are looking at the content and context, you're going to see now it's expanded. We're now not only on a wide variety of familiar, but we have familiar and researched topics. So you're seeing that come out. And now my text type has shifted. So now I need to, in this next week or whatever part of my syllabus is aiming towards intermediate high, I need them creating short paragraphs. And that is for interpretive mode, presentational mode, and interpersonal. My example is just presentational, but it would be the same for all 3. So what you're leaving behind as you leave in the land of intermediate and go into advanced low, that's great. You can go ahead to that next one. When you go to advanced low, you're going to see that there's no talk about sentences anymore. We are exclusively in paragraphs. So if you look at that text type here, we had to leave behind all connected sentences and we need to add in eliciting those paragraphs. But let's take a look at our functions. Our functions remain exactly the same. Inform and explain, give a preference, narrate about my life and events. So if you click on the animations and we look at that first box of advanced low, you're going to see that it's in those boxes that it says not often across timeframes now, it just says across various timeframes. So we know that you're building up the vocabulary for that content or context, as well as narrating across various timeframes. Content and context, you're going to see that we now are going into some unfamiliar topics. But when we advance now to advanced mid, you're going to see that now my content and context went wide variety of familiar and unfamiliar topics, social, academic, and professional. So as Thor was thinking through the 6 weeks, moving from intermediate mid to advanced low, he was being very mindful, as was the AI tool that he was using, of making sure that it aligned with content and context to bring those learners up to, in his case of that example of Farsi, to advanced low. So again, advanced mid, our functions remain the same, but now the accuracy, the leaves that make that tree look beautiful, what we're building as those buds start to grow, we're building the ability to do detailed explanations supporting evidence across timeframes. So you can see that the leaves that are making that tree green and beautiful are increased vocabulary that's detailed, as well as narration across timeframes consistently. So,
Right.
so I'd love to pause here and see if there are questions, because I saw a couple things pop up in the chat, and I'm sorry I wasn't reading that simultaneously.
I think those are me.
Oh, okay. So I don't know, and you're going to have a breakout room after Thor gives his example here, but I'd like you to think about how could you look at these can-do statements and think about that criteria of fact in order to make that functional syllabus clear to both the faculty as well as to the learners.
And this page is like the top level. So presentational communication advanced. This is kind of the overview. When you dig down into the more detailed descriptions of advanced low or of advanced mid or advanced high, they give lots of examples, like much more detailed can-do statements to help you think about like what kinds of things am I observing or seeing in the learners in a more detailed way based on language acquisition research, based on research on language development at these different phases. So I might dig in a little bit more, and then we're going to go into a breakout room of just taking this idea of like a Farsi 3 class, just as an example. So I've got this narrative spine. I know I'm moving across the weeks. I started week 1. My learners are intermediate mid. I want to get them to advanced low by the end of the summer, by week 6. Even in my content class, obviously I have colleagues who are teaching the Farsi grammar or the Farsi language skills class that are working on this. But even in my culture class, I'm still wanting to think intentionally about helping them to move forward with that. So again, as I lay out my units across this progression, my themes. So I've got this layer of units. I actually asked AI, it was surprisingly good. I asked it to give me links of short stories and poems that would go on this theme that would align with this proficiency level. And I actually looked at some of these short stories like, oh, these are kind of good short stories. If I knew Farsi well, I would probably assign these. But let's say that this is what I might hand my learners right away, is they know the themes and they know the texts that we're going to be reading. But when I actually come to designing my instruction, I need to ask myself, but what are my assignments? What are we doing in each of these weeks? I know the texts, but what prompts am I giving them? What are they doing when they're in their small groups? What kind of feedback am I giving them? Am I going to be like grading them or marking points off for things that are advanced low level accuracy issues when they're only intermediate high level students or not? Like, what language resources am I going to provide them with so that I can kind of move across this progression in the different modes? And this is where I think AI can be really helpful, and we'll introduce after the breakout room an AI tool that's been pre-trained in a lot of this stuff. But I say, what is a key functional descriptor For interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational, which one should be my main focus in each of the 6 weeks? So in week 2, what's the main thing I should be thinking about cultivating with my learners as we read about family, memory, and struggle? As we read these Farsi poems, these Farsi short stories, look at some Farsi artworks, what language things am I going to be doing with my learners in that week? And it did a very good job of actually doing this. So these would be my main, in order to move from intermediate mid to advanced low. And for graduate programs, this also works. If you're moving your students from B2 to C1 or from low C1, C1.1 to C1.2, what are the functions that are involved? So this helps me as I think about what kinds of activities do I want to design in this week? What kinds of discussions do I want to have? What kinds of writing assignments? How are we going to tackle the short stories or the poems or the artworks or the YouTube videos that appear in our class, to make sure that it's not just they're doing the same things every week about new topics and they're learning interesting new aspects about Iranian culture, but what would they have to do to actually make sure that what they're doing in week 5 is asking more of them than what they were doing in week 2 and is pushing them forward to the next step? And if we zoom in on just weeks 3 and 4, again, we've kind of got these functions. The actual proficiency descriptors have lots of even more specific examples. So if I think about at that intermediate high level, these are my main functions. These are the contexts and text types for interpersonal when the students interact with each other, interpretive when they read or listen, and presentational when they speak or when they write. I can dig in even more concretely and more specifically into this. Another thing that I think then, okay, I still want to support their language development. What sentence frames would be useful? So what kinds of sentence frames would I want to give to my learners, maybe on what they call like a chat mat, like a paper at their desks, or have on the board or in a handout or something to teach or to practice for that week to help scaffold this? So for weeks 3 and 4, sentence frames to help the learners interpret and react to text, compare perspectives, extend from sentence level talk, which is the intermediate, to connected discourse across time frames, which is the advanced. And it did a great job of giving me a list of, for all of these tasks, what are the actual language structures that would be useful in my culture class that they may not have learned in their textbook, they may not have gotten yet in their practice in the cafeteria, but that I could equip them with or support them with that would be level appropriate. Things like, in my opinion, it seems that, I think because this shows that, so this would be sort of at the beginning of the class, and moving up along the way. So even getting suggestions for this can be helpful of level aligned. So let's go ahead now. We've taught you for a long time to put people in breakout rooms. Do you think 3? Yeah, and I'm just going to have it kind of randomly assigned to breakout rooms. What we'd like you is to discuss, how do you react to this so far? Do you already do this? The functions don't have to be the star and probably shouldn't be the star, but they're an invisible spine that's kind of holding up or marking the progress to move them around. So yeah, how do you respond to this? Like, what are you thinking so far? Okay, welcome back. I know you're probably ripped out of the middle of a conversation. I try to give you a 2-minute and a 1-minute warning so you could aim, but it's always good to leave people hungry for more conversation. So I mentioned that I'd used an AI tool. Sort of the age of the large language model is kind of ending. What's coming into being is the small language model. So language model that's pre-trained on a very, very specific set of knowledge. So the one that I was using for these examples is one that Leah helped train and develop. This is a custom GPT. Custom GPTs are available to all people. You have a limited amount of prompts per day if you don't have a subscription to GPT. We're working on trying to move this over to Gemini. For those of you who don't want to use GPT, I can understand why. But what this is it's a GPT which has been pre-trained. Actually, Leah, why don't you just share what you've pre-trained it on?
Okay, great. So if you go to this site, and you can hit it a couple different ways. You can go to ChatGPT and then look at it in the store. You can do this tiny URL, or you could hit that code. But basically, if you advance to the next slide, you'll see that there are a couple different purposes that we could use this for, including syllabus, reimagining the syllabus, thinking through, I'll just have you click through the animations here,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
designing units, designing lessons. But one of the things that I love doing with it is I attach authentic resources, whether it's poetry or readings, or if I wanted to include academic conversation protocols, I can upload resources to it and then have it create specific tasks for me. So when I designed this, it is built upon the Common European Framework. It's built upon the ACFL proficiency guidelines, intercultural can-do statements, models of proficiency-based units based on Wiggins-McTighe backward planning. So there's all kinds of documents that it's going to access, and then you type in a whole series of instructions to get it to say, this is what I would like you to do when you're creating these documents. So that's some of the uses for it. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that, this is going to be you explaining the German one. So go ahead, I'll let you take over.
That's okay. Yeah, so just as a reminder too, you can interact with it in any language. So if you interact with it and say, I speak Swiss German, it will do all of this work in the actual proficiency guidelines in Swiss German. Like how good it is probably needs a few refinements, but you don't have to do this only in English. And the syllabus language that you create, it can create functions aligned syllabus language for you in any of the languages that we teach. So again, that URL works. The QR code sounds like it wasn't working for people, but that URL will work. So I just had an example. I taught level 1 with a lovely German colleague, Alex Kudryashova. Some of you guys remember her. She taught the German 1 for reading knowledge, kind of parallel to me when I was teaching level 1. We didn't actually interact a whole lot. I kind of regret that. I wish that we had synthesized our syllabi a little bit more intentionally. But I did have her syllabus from the summer of 2022. And so I just kind of want to guide you through what could it look like to use an AI tool just to kind of revisit or pull some things out. So I have her thematic and media syllabus. I asked GPT to help me create an overview of language functions. I know what proficiency level these people are. They're starting at novice low and moving their way up to intermediate, the low mid by the end of the summer. To create a more detailed table of language functions, I can even have it generate student-facing I can statements in English and in German that the learners could use to assess themselves at the end of each week. Or maybe more importantly, that I as a faculty member can ask myself, can the students really do this at this point in our class? Is there more work that needs to be done? Should I encourage them to go to office hours? And what would I encourage them to go for to get more practice? Identify useful sentence frames and potentially even design hours of instruction for this. So I'm going to switch my share over to, okay, so this is what the curriculum development GPT looks like, a custom GPT. When you go to explore GPTs, if you go to the website, you can either just type in WL curriculum development or go there directly from this link, and then you can add prompts here. If you have the more expensive version, you can use the thinking option. It'll give you a better result. But I'm going to show you, basically, if you use this tiny URL up at the top, you have the link to this doc. So this was the German 1. I'll make it a little bigger. The syllabus of the works of art or works of prose poetry that are being covered in the different weeks of the class. She did a great job, of course. She's amazing. Moving from people who are novice low up, I'm not saying that she did anything wrong here. This is amazing. But what I asked it to do then is to say, if we were going to collaborate as the language development teacher and her as the literature teacher, the content teacher, what are the functions that could be our focus in each of the communicative modes for each of the weeks? Thinking about what are the main verbs that would highlight. This helps me to get an overview as I design tasks. What are we going to be doing with the different texts in our course from week to week as we move through this? I know what the texts are, but what am I going to ask of my learners? Then I asked it to create a more detailed table, which my target proficiency level, what they're doing in a more detailed way. This really helps me actually design my instructional hours and even thinking about what kinds of things am I going to ask so that we're not just having the same kinds of discussions from week to week, but I'm intentionally pushing them a little bit on to the next level of sophistication as we deal with these texts. You can look at this for yourself, but then student-facing descriptions, these are in English, but I could do them in German. I could have my students check. I can describe what I notice in a poem. I can say how a poem sounds or looks. I can ask and answer simple questions about a poem, and they can think and decide, can I do this or not? So these kinds of, these are what we're going to be doing this week in our class. These are the functions you're going to be practicing. And at the end, can you do this as a learner? Have we been able to get there as a teacher? The sentence frames I think are really interesting. These are going to be different from language to language, from level to level. These are pretty low level learners. But what are some sentence frames that I could equip the learners with that they may not be getting in their other courses, but that would really scaffold their performance in these functions? This could be on a chat mat, on a handout, things that I write on the board, some interpersonal frames for when they're having a discussion, agreeing, clarifying, negotiating, meaning, and presentational frames from when they're kind of speaking more at length or writing more at length, which at this level is, a couple sentences at a time. And then even if you trusted it, obviously you never want AI to design their lesson plans. We don't want to do this, but it can be interesting when you ask it, okay, what do you think a sample 60-minute plan would look like on week 3 on a Tuesday? I wouldn't copy over some of this, but the fact that it does have me interpret, then has me interact based on our interpretation, then ends with a presenting of some kind, making sure that we're practicing the different modes as we work through the texts and that we practice them in different ways that push us ahead in these different levels. So that's something that I think is something that AI tools can make a little bit easier or save a little bit of the time. They can't replace our knowledge and our expertise, and I'm not asking them to do that. But I'm just kind of trying to think with one that's pre-trained on all this knowledge, having it as a thought partner, a kind of a sparring partner to feed it our syllabus, to feed it our ideas for what we would cover in a unit. It can suggest language, activities, sentence frames, functions, assessments for us that can help us make sure that our syllabi are moving on. Okay, Leah, if you want to present about the writing.
Sure, that would be great. I also just wanted to share that the more you add in that plus button, and the Thor was showing you where you can add documents, the more you add to that and the more you think of it as a conversation partner, the better you're going to find that you're going to get those results. So when Chris, Erica, and I were working on Portuguese this weekend, it was great. The more we added from Chris's documents, the more accurate it was in terms of thinking through the vocabulary and structures that would need to be in supporting those language functions. So I do want to emphasize that. That's a really good part of it. So yes, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let me get to this. And I'm going to share one more. Okay, so this is a separate customized GPT. So this is not the same one as the world language curriculum. This one is for assessing writing levels and thinking about very specific concrete strategies to move up to the next level. So when you go into ChatGPT, I just did a quick screenshot at the top right here. You can go to where it says explore GPTs. And if you type in build proficiency -level up, as soon as you get that far, it just pops up. So this is a separate tiny URL. So this is tinyurl.com and WL-writing. And you will see that, that this has really grounded, it's completely grounded in the alignment to the criteria of fact. So let me just show you what this one would do for you. It is going to give you an estimated score of writing with evidence of why it gets that score. I want to make it clear this is not in a tool to replace LTI testing, stamp testing, or any of our, external language testing organizations. This is just to give us an estimate. And the most important thing for me is the reason of why it gave it that score. So, and the score will be completely aligned with fact. It helps calibrate feedback to help students level up one level. So I gave it a lot of information about Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development and wanted to make sure that no learner was getting feedback that was too far outside of that zone of proximal development. So it will give you leveling up one level. And then finally, the main thing is getting those strategies, based on the criteria of fact, function, accuracy, content, text type that will help that learner grow. So I just wanted to show you what it would look like, and I'll go into the actual ChatGPT in a moment and show you this. But you're going to see that if you click that plus sign at the bottom, you will see this little menu pop up, and it could be add photos or files, recent files, etc. And so I can go and take a picture and upload a JPEG of writing. So even if you are not using technology for your writing, a student or you could literally take a picture of it, upload it, and get the feedback immediately from this GPT. So here's what I pasted into it. I just wanted to put, this was a student in elementary. This is first year of Spanish. And so this is what the student writes. This is a 5th grade student. You can see that they have some very basic grammar in here, basic vocabulary to describe their things that they like, as well as their personality. So it says, well, this is about a novice high. This is me doing a screenshot of the results from that writing piece. And the reason that it's around a novice high is because this student is able to describe personality and physical traits, express preferences, and list hobbies and activities. So these things would be appropriate for somebody that's in the novice range. Not analysis of accuracy. This is, again, coming up right on the report, and you'll see it. This is just me putting it into like a nice little package for you here. Accuracy, you can see that it talks about what are the correct uses, and then it goes into the errors, and it also says that these errors are appropriate for somebody that's in that range. Then it gives you the analysis of content and context, as well as text type. Well, this is very, very limited content context. This is personal description, hobbies, and very familiar daily life topics, again, appropriate. And what is the text type? Mostly words and phrases, some simple sentences, heavy reliance on listing, minimal sentence variety. So again, the justification for why it came back as a novice high is more important to me than the actual scoring. So then here's where the magic happens. It will give specific strategies to move up from a novice high to an intermediate low. Expand sentences using the 5 W's. Strategy 2, use connecting words. Strategy 3, increase vocabulary, not just grammar. So you can see that it's giving a learner something that's very concrete to be able to work with to move up to that next level. You can also say, actually, I just like you to do the rewritten version. So if you look at this, I specifically put a very low level one because I wanted to be able to distinguish this here. You can see that it took the original writing and just moved it to a little bit of a higher level. So you can see the atlética, simpática, y cómica, those are now the same adjectives that were in there, but you're going to see those connecting words. Like you can see también is in here. You can see the word porque is in here. So they use the connecting words. So they took those 3 strategies here and said, now let's expand using the 5 W's. Let's add in a couple of these connecting words, and let's not just let's replace that me gusta with no me gusta, a veces, or prefiero. Try to get a little variety in there to move up. So then it tells you why it's improved. So that's the important part that I think seeing that improvement is great. And then, it will give you novice high versus intermediate low. So you can be able to see what those differences look like. And then it will articulate what are the key differences between those sublevels. So I know that I'm going somewhat quickly here, so we will get a chance on Saturday to do a little bit of like workshopping this. So if you do join us on Saturday, we can play with this a little bit more. But if you'll just give me one moment, I just wanted to show you an advanced level one. I wanted to show you the simple one just so that we could wrap our brains around it. But this is all the simple. So I'm going to go ahead. You can see it gives all this final feedback, the different versions. What are the takeaways? Okay. So now I pasted in this. It's about a protocol for dual immersion. And this is about how to use primary resources and how to go through the cuatro exposiciones when you have a new primary resource you want to explore. So you can see that just the length of this text is longer. So this didn't lend itself to my slides as well, but I wanted you to see this is about a page. It says this is estimated level is about an advanced mid. Why? So here's the important part. It's explaining processes, describing in detail, clarifying and defining concepts, supporting ideas with elaboration, as well as using academic language to present information. Grammar, you can see strong control, complex sentence structures, academic vocabulary, minor issues, slight punctuation and formatting inconsistencies. That's from the educational protocol, so kind of funny, but it is true that those could be addressed. And then content and context, you can see it gets into cognitive processes as well as a structured classroom protocol. And you can see that the text type is clear paragraph level discourse with the introduction of the concept, sequence steps, and concluding relevance. So then it says, here's the strategies to move up to advanced higher superior. And then it says, would you like me to rewrite this at advanced high or superior? I say, sure, please rewrite one level higher. And now you can see that it will provide that to me. So as students go week by week in their learning, to be able to stop and say at the end of each week, how are you progressing with your writing? You can take a picture of something. You can you can also use a transcription of a voice recording and submit that as written, and be able to say, so what would your goals be to move up to that next level? I'm finding that this has been very powerful feedback, that we have been able to see used, and I'm using it right now, really first or second grade through it, K to 16 are the different groups of educators who are using it right now that are feeling that it's really beneficial to the learners.
Great. And so again, like even if you're teaching a graduate level course, we still have language development in mind. So not every native speaker even speaks at a distinguished level. Sometimes a lot of heritage learners aren't necessarily using language in all of the modes at a superior level. There's lots of ways that we can support language development, and this does include feedback for very high level functions. Okay. We don't want to outsource writing feedback to the AI, but if AI can give feedback just on the level so that I can give more feedback with my limited time, especially limited time in the summer, on their content, on what they're saying, on their understanding, building rapport, it's a way of like giving AI the thing that we trust it with, just the kind of the technical tasks so that I can give feedback based on our interpersonal relationship and based on our understanding and our experience.